So without further ado, let's welcome Jeremy on stage with a quick intro, and then we have Q&As from the audience. Jeremy, welcome.
Thank you, Kwang. It's wonderful to be here with everybody. As Kwang said, I'm the CTO at SoFi. I joined SoFi just over a year ago. And one of the topics I'm very passionate about is operational excellence. It's something that we spend a lot of energy on at SoFi, and I've spent a lot of energy on in past environments. And so I've prepared a few slides to talk through some concepts really geared to kind of the team level more than anything else. And then during Q&A, happy to talk about this in more depth. All right. So as Kwang said, I am a proud father of 5, large family. The youngest are 4-month-old twins, which adds an element of excitement to the house every day for sure. And then a variety of other hobbies. I love photography. My wife and I are big sponsors of the San Francisco Ballet. We really like that. And when I do find time to fly, it's a lot of fun. Kwang also mentioned a little bit about my background in technology. I actually started my career in the Marine Corps as an artillery officer, not doing technology work really. But after getting out of the Marine Corps in the early 2000s, I've had the good fortune to work at a variety of technology companies, starting in Boston, including a couple startups, a priori and Bluefin Labs. Bluefin Labs was acquired by Twitter just in 2013 before Twitter's IPO. And that ultimately brought me to the Bay Area, where I've been for nearly 10 years now. Then after a stint at Twitter, DoorDash, Splunk, I found my way to SoFi. I really love SoFi. The mission we're on the team here are incredible. So very excited about the path ahead there. And for those who are not familiar with SoFi, a little bit about what we do. So SoFi Technologies really has 3 lines of business. One is our lending business, which was really the origin of SoFi. A number of different kind of lending products, including personal loans and student loans, home loans, and so forth. A whole suite of financial services. So SoFi became a bank and a bank holding company a little over a year ago, and offers a full complement of banking, credit card, and brokerage services. And then we have a technology platform that's used by other fintechs and banks, goes under the brand name Galileo. The kind of origins of that go back to a company that SoFi acquired around 3 years ago and has continued to extend. And SoFi, like many sort of high growth startups, even though it's in financial services and sort of banking as an industry, has grown a lot over the last several years. And you can see the number of members that SoFi has and sort of how that's kind of continued to grow quite fast. And as it continues to grow fast, of course, the sort of operational themes continue to be very important. And so a bit of a story. Last fall, I had just come back from an early morning run, which was kind of my habit here in San Francisco. Foggy morning as typical. And as I'm getting back, I get a text from our CEO, Anthony Noto. You can see on the screen there, this is a real text, a real screenshot. And so I hadn't heard anything from the team. We obviously have kind of monitoring and so forth 24/7. But I check in with the team, and sure enough, they're investigating an issue with the app. And obviously, sort of things happen from time to time. But one of the things we experience at SoFi, and I'm sure many of you experience if you work for well-known companies, especially, or just have a passionate user base for your product of whatever size, is that in the age of social media, people will talk about what's working and what's not working. And when the app isn't working, we often hear about it on Twitter or Reddit and sort of forums like that. And so here's some snippets straight from Twitter, Reddit, members experiencing an issue, getting into the app, or sort of being able to sort of take advantage of the functionality that they're intending to hit. All of which sort of highlights the theme. We talk about our mission of getting your money right, and we really want to help members get their money right with kind of one-stop shop financial services. But getting your money right requires very high reliability standards. You really want your money and your financial services to work all the time, and therefore we have to put a super high emphasis behind reliability. And one of the ways we talk about that is we put operational excellence right at the top of the list. I talk about it, the product and engineering leaders, the business leaders sort of inside SoFi talk about this all the time. And I really love this foundational principle. I think I first encountered it in this formulation in the Google SRE book. But it's simply that reliability is the most important feature. And we talk about this a lot internally. Obviously, when you're working on newer products and services, or you're working in sort of a high growth environment, there's extremely high demand to add new features and capabilities. I've worked on many new products, including startups from, day zero sort of work. But it's important to remember that reliability for your users is the most important feature. And so what kind of are the essential ingredients that go into operational excellence? In my kind of travels, I've come up with this formulation. Really sort of three things are required. One is perhaps the most important is mindset. The second is sort of measurement. You really want to turn these outcomes into data so you can understand what's working and what's not, and how to improve. And then finally, discipline. So making these into habits and sort of having the discipline to stay after it routinely is how you achieve great results. And so what can you do at the team level, and what are some of the things that we've done at SoFi sort of or in other environments? First and most important is carving out time for operational excellence work. The number one thing I hear from people, whether it's inside companies where I've worked, including SoFi, or whether it's in other environments, is that they struggle with the prioritization and the time and energy that they believe is required, perceive is required to sort of do operational excellence work. And so, for leaders on teams or sort of groups of teams, carving out time, making this explicit, and letting people know that it's important, why you're working on it, and what is involved in that is sort of first and foremost. A strategy that I've seen many teams employ and seems to work quite well is if you have teams that run a regular on-call rotation, which probably nearly everyone here does, having on-call engineers be able to pick up OE work in the background, in and around times they may be responding to something that an incident or an alert or sort of something active that's happening, can be a really great strategy to get kind of ongoing energy against these themes. Third, I would say is sort of measure the basics. And so all teams, sort of experience some really sort of foundational dimensions to their work. Nearly all teams will have some system for kind of getting alerts when something's going wrong. Nearly all teams include in that some way to say, well, I'm going to ignore this alert. And we call those at SoFi sort of suppressed alerts. And then if, you're familiar with DORA or kind of other ways of sort of organizing metrics, there's been a lot of work in the industry over the last, 10 or 15 years around how you can kind of measure and assess operational kind of maturity on teams. The DORA metrics are a good one, measuring things like deployment frequency and kind of failure rates, and being able to sort of just do these sort of basic measurements for any size team for any kind of level and complexity of services is super important. I would say, in addition, creating service level indicators and service level objectives for your services is a great thing to do, and helps you sort of really refine an understanding of what operational excellence looks like for your users. And then if you're inside of a large organization, really, which could be, anything above a kind of single team sort of startup level, find out what others are doing sort of inside your organization and compare notes, kind of share techniques, and figure out how you might even evolve some standards kind of across the organization. Many teams and companies or sort of organizations kind of will evolve some central teams that kind of help provide tools and capabilities to do this. But anywhere sort of along that journey, you will find that others are interested in this theme, and you can kind of ally with them. And some lessons learned sort of through these experiences. So kind of building on that final point, finding your champions. Essentially all teams that I've ever been part of, from the smallest to the largest sort of organizations, there are people who are naturally passionate about this work. Often they'll be working on this in the background, even if it's not sort of formally prioritized and something that's kind of talked about a lot across the team. And so as in any kind of leadership role, finding those sort of passionate champions is really important, and getting them kind of activated and supported and helping make sure that the work is recognized as important. Second, I would say start somewhere and iterate. Making things really sort of simple and low stakes to get started is really powerful. And just getting kind of momentum and progress sort of towards these themes from whatever level you're starting at is what builds success in the long term. Making it really easy to do this work is sort of super critical. So prioritizing small improvements, in collecting data and sort of organizing data into dashboards, automating all of that to the maximum extent possible from the very beginning is really important and helpful. And so just kind of ensuring that this work can be done in kind of the easiest, lowest friction way. And then finally, stick with it. And this is where kind of the discipline sort of comes in. We at SoFi run an operational excellence meeting every week where we look at a bunch of automated dashboards across all of our services that measure a bunch of different things that we think are important. And we talk about kind of any areas where there's exceptions or things, kind of have fallen outside the band that we consider healthy for that metric. And we also talk about what's happening kind of over the course of the next week and what the next priorities of improvement are. And at all levels, that sort of continual progress is really important. Small improvements accumulate a lot. And so you don't have to, each week doesn't have to be a kind of watershed week in terms of how much you sort of build or change, but accumulating kind of small progress, small improvements over time really leads to great outcomes. And so then, kind of continuing the story, over the last, since the story I talked about at the outset, over the last, 6 or 7 months, what we've seen sort of through our efforts and through having kind of operational excellence be the top of mind for every team at SoFi is really strong sustained improvement in all of the measurable kind of metrics that we have. Teams are much better able to prioritize resilience and operational excellence work. And that's, of course, lead to great improvements. And then finally, a screenshot from our Slack, my favorite flavor of incident, things are going to go wrong. But the best outcome is that when things go wrong, we find out about it in advance of it having any impact for our members, for our end users. And so we've seen more and more when there's a problem in the system, we're able to identify it and remediate it before it has any impact for people, which is fantastic. And that's it. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy. It was awesome to hear your thoughts about mindset, process, and all the personal anecdotes and stories. We have 2 questions in the Q&A tab. Everyone, if you have any question for Jeremy, make sure to add them in the Q&A. If you want also to influence which question I'm going to pick, please vote for the question you want me to pick. So let's start with a question from Ashish Agrawal. So it's the question with the most vote for now. How do you get buy-in from your product and business counterparts to do this work? So the question is also on the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, great question. What I have found is that from the engineering side, when you explain sort of an approach to this work and kind of what you think this work means in terms of the outcomes, it's reasonably easy to get product and business leaders to understand the importance and to help kind of align the other outcomes that you're working on, kind of business outcomes, new features, and so forth, sort of to these OE themes. And so I've found that it's not as difficult to sort of make the case for this as is often feared. There are a couple things that can help. One is when you sort of talk about it with product and business leaders, to talk about it in the context of product outcomes and business outcomes, right? And so one of the things we talk about is sort of speaking the language of the business. So we can talk about how the sort of effort to build in kind of stronger reliability and stronger kind of operational results leads to better outcomes for users, better outcomes for product growth and adoption, better outcomes for the business. So you find, the specifics of that obviously will vary by product and business, but talking about that explicitly with them is super important. And I think you are likely to find that they are more willing to sort of engage and understand the importance of that than people often sort of fear in advance.
A related questions from Aditya is, features tasks often have a dollar impact. what kind of metric do you use to quantify the impact of operational efforts? That's, I think, speaks well to non-engineering counterparts, I suspect.
Yeah, so great question. Depending on the nature of the product and service, you often can measure the impact of operational issues or quality of service issues or reliability of issues on, kind of direct in-user activity. And so at SoFi, for example, if there are kind of interruptions of service, even in just sort of particularly narrow features, we can collect data about that and kind of understand and sort of measure the impact of that and kind of put it directly in terms of, member activity, the, sort of flow of transactions and so forth. And in other sort of products that I've worked on in the past, you can do similar things. I think if your product or service is not amenable in a very obvious way to sort of that kind of analysis, what I would suggest that you do is try to, sort of try to reason through, with help from product managers, business leaders, and so forth, and sort of in this, if helpful, to sort of understand, okay, what, if there are, if we have reliability challenges, if there are sort of quality of service challenges for our products, what are the implications of that for what people are trying to do with the product? And just sort of trying to reason through that and kind of unpack what reliability means in your context can be very helpful. And then down those pathways, you will find some things that you can measure. So somewhere in that, you'll unpack, whether they're, direct measures of those end outcomes or whether they're kind of proxy for that. So the specifics will, of course, vary a lot by sort of different products, but all products and services sort of that are technology based, some level of reliability and sort of quality of service is kind of inherent in being able to sort of deliver what the value is that sort of somebody's getting out of using it. And so you should be able to draw a kind of story from that reliability and quality to those outcomes.
And I suspect the framework to quantify the dollar impact can be used for reliability, but also for any type of feature. So any feature has a dollar impact.
Yeah.
Related to engineering metrics, related to metrics, we also have another questions about engineering metrics. So the question is from Doug Lawrence. Have you built out centralized dashboard for operational metrics using data from various sources? For example, Jira, Git, Slack. Do you have something like this?
Yes, we do. And I would suggest on teams of any size, I think it's an extremely powerful thing to do. There are obviously lots of tools now in the world to help you do this. We have automated and kind of centralized dashboards at SoFi where we collect a standard set of metrics and data in kind of the operational excellence themes. And that's the primary thing that we look at when we do OE reviews every week at the kind of team, sort of overall engineering organization level. In addition, individual teams have dashboards, health dashboards, and so forth for their services. So there's quite a bit of instrumentation and automation that goes into that.
So what specific tools you are recommending or building things internally? What do you recommend?
Oh, there's a lot of tools out there. So at SoFi today, one of the kind of primary observability tools we use is Datadog. I've obviously used Splunk a lot, including when I was at Splunk for a variety of different observability and kind of analytics efforts. We use GitLab as our primary source control mechanism, and that has a lot of capabilities that extend into our ability to kind of automate various metrics around kind of how code is flowing from engineering creation to deployment and so forth. So lots of tools. I've used probably nearly every tool in some different capacity that's existed over the last sort of 15 years in this capacity. So I would look around and see what you have if you're starting off sort of introducing it. Of course you can go find your way to a bunch of different tools and approaches that are helpful. But making use of goes back to the kind of mindset and sort of discipline approaches that I talked about. There are where I sort of see teams struggle the most is not that they've chosen the wrong tool and it doesn't do sort of exactly the thing that they need it to do. It's more commonly that they're simply not sort of doing anything, or they haven't really started to take advantage of the capabilities that exist in almost any of the sort of reasonable tools out there to kind of instrument their work and understand and kind of measure sort of their operational posture. So I think that kind of mindset and discipline around doing it, you will find probably is the high order bet compared to, specific tool selection.
Sounds good. The pros, what you want to measure, the strategy more important than the tool. Because we still have more time, I'd like to stick a little bit on this topic about how to interact with non-engineering peers. And there's a good question from Ron about, is there a perception either from engineers or the business that operational excellence implies a trade-off with velocity of roadmap delivery?
Sometimes there are people who will kind of have that mindset. Oftentimes engineers have that mindset. Clearly in a given day or a week or a sprint or whatever is your sort of short sort of horizon work, an engineer can kind of only do one thing at a time. I mean, we have to sort of sit down and do some work. They can either focus on a task maybe that's really a priority from an operational excellence or resilience perspective. They can be focused on coding a new feature. You can be focused on design of some new part of the system, what have you. So, at some level, there are trade-offs in the short term. What I sort of firmly believe and have seen play out over and over again in my experiences is that over the kind of medium and longer term, having, really highly reliable, well-designed systems and having high discipline around operational excellence makes everything else easier. So it makes the sort of overall velocity and delivery capability and quality of the team much better over time. And so, it's one of the added reasons to sort of invest in this work. And so, sort of examples of how I've seen that, if you've been on most teams, even very good teams will go through periods where their kind of alert load on the services that they're responsible for operating will kind of creep up and creep up and creep up. And often it's one of those like frog in the boiling water kind of things. And I know the frog in the boiling water isn't even like real, but that it's one of those things where you sort of acclimate and the team can kind of slowly sort of condition itself to just dealing with a sort of very large number of alerts. But the distraction of that and the kind of burden of that kind of grows and grows and grows. And it's definitely beneficial in those circumstances to kind of stop and go back and remediate and kind of get back to sort of a healthy level of alerts that's sort of manageable for the team. Because otherwise the sort of background and burden of that kind of slows everything down. And so it's, sort of just a kind of specific sort of version of this. But what you will find is that sort of investments in operational excellence will lead to higher velocity work over time and sustained velocity. Another way to think about that is the maintaining sort of high quality of service makes it possible for teams to deliver stuff at much higher throughput, to deploy more frequently, for more of those deployments to be successful, to do less remediation. And all of that just accumulates to higher velocity over time. So really, in the big picture, all this pays off.
And do you have, so the next question is coming from Hendra Wong about a quota. Do you have some sort of quota? Do you include some sort of percentage of operational excellence work in each team, 5, 10%, monthly, quarterly, something like that?
We haven't tried to formalize quota. I would say individual teams to some extent will do that, in talking with engineers and managers down at the team level at SoFi. There are teams that carve off, one sprint per quarter to do kind of dedicated focused work. There are teams that include some kind of percentage of the story points or sort of how they think about kind of budgeting time, sort of each sprint to sort of focus on this. So it kind of varies across teams at SoFi. And in the past, I've seen sort of a range of those techniques. I think from my vantage, I love it when teams figure out what works best for them to kind of incorporate prioritizing this work into the sort of ongoing flow of their activity. So I'm kind of supportive of any of these approaches, and teams figuring that out, kind of what will work for them, pays big dividends.
Sounds good. Let's switch gears a bit. The most voted question right now is about a simple playbook. Is there a simple playbook for operational excellence that company of various size can prioritize and pick up? And I suspect that the question lies also on, do you have any advice for smaller companies?
Yeah. So there are some great resources out there. The Google SRE book is a really good resource on a lot of these kind of related themes. There's a lot of material written about service level objectives and service level indicators. And if you're not, really familiar with the vocabulary and kind of the detail behind that, I would, recommend kind of taking a look at and kind of learning more there. It talks a lot about, sort of what to measure and why, and sort of how to think about maturing that. So for companies of all sizes, so starting from, kind of startup, individual, team, could be even just 2 or 3 engineers, what have you. I think as soon as you start running services that other people are going to depend on, either, sort of end users outside the company or other teams sort of inside the company, you want to have some foundational ability to kind of measure how that's going, and look at that regularly, like at least, sort of once a week, if not, kind of real-time dashboards to sort of understand how that's going, and start to develop for yourself some quantified understanding of, like, this is what healthy is, this is what, sort of degraded kind of capability is, and this is sort of unhealthy, and we need to, we really need to sort of zoom in and take a look at that. In addition, you start to sort of do that, I think measuring some of the kind of metadata around the sort of how the team is kind of operating these services. I mentioned things like alert load. So really as simple as starting with, hey, how often do we get paged in some sense? How often do we get kind of alerted that there's a problem with the service? Just that piece of data is kind of really helpful, and you can see how that's trending. And if it's going up, you probably want to take a look at that. And you can kind of over time figure out, like, what's a healthy, sustainable range for our team. The specifics will vary team to team and kind of company to company. And so what I tend to find is that measuring some of these basic things and then looking at kind of trends and teams sort of arriving at an understanding for themselves about what is healthy and what's unhealthy in their environment for their team leads to the best outcomes. For larger organizations, benefit that most larger organizations should have is that you can kind of get leverage out of some more centralized investments. And so depending on, the technology stack and kind of the nature of the tools, but if you have many teams that are sort of building products and services using similar technology and, similar or the same approaches and the same, kind of deployment sort of architectures and all that, then you can really kind of get some value out of central investments, whether that's, pull some engineering time from each of the teams to kind of contribute to central tools, or create a small team, kind of an engineering enablement or engineering tool team that kind of builds capabilities that other teams use. And so as you sort of organizations get larger, I definitely recommend kind of techniques like that. And then in very large organizations, these teams almost certainly exist, and their sort of approaches and tools and so forth. And then for the individual team, it's a matter of adopting those tools and best practices and kind of figuring out how to really make them work for your own team.
We talked a lot about the value of operational excellence, about how to communicate this and how to measure this. Let's talk a little bit about organization and teams. So the next question is about Alex, and I think we already touched base a little bit on this, which is, what is your view on application development teams owning operational excellence versus having a dedicated team? It seems that developers' team always have pressure to build features versus investing time in operational excellence. What's your take on this?
In general, I think application teams should own the kind of operational health and characteristics of their services. And there maybe are some, sort of fairly exotic kind of exceptions to that, but that's the sort of general principle that I have tried to adhere to, and I think works for the vast majority of teams. I think kind of connecting the dots between operational excellence and health and the successful sort of adoption and use by your end users or your customers, whether they're internal or external, of your services is sort of really important, right? It goes all the way back to the thing I said at the outset is that reliability is the most important feature. And so really, we repeat this mantra a lot, and we really believe it, which is to say that, look, we can deliver these fantastic capabilities and these fantastic features, but if they don't work, they're not valuable to anybody because nobody's using them, right? Sort of, it's as simple as that. And so I think kind of sticking with that simple idea and then kind of expanding on what does that mean in practice. None of our technology systems are perfect. And so we know that there's going to be ongoing work we're going to discover new kinds of problems. We're going to have to remediate those problems as we design new things and systems continue to get more and more complex. We're going to introduce new flavors of sort of issues. And so there is this kind of never ending energy and work to it. That's also important to sort of articulate for people so they understand, like, this will be an ongoing theme. It's not like you can go sort of check the box and solve operational excellence once and for all kind of forever. It takes this sort of ongoing investment to deliver, but it's part of how you deliver value through the features that you are building. And then what you will find, and I'm sure, those who have kind of developed in their own teams or have the good fortune to work on teams where you have a relatively mature approach to operational excellence, is how you design new features will start to be informed by your operational practices. So for example, sort of take some simple examples. You're building a mobile app or you're building a web app. You want that sort of user experience to be resilient against certain kinds of things that can kind of go wrong on the back end. And if you start to first come to grips with those through thinking about reliability and operational excellence, that will start to inform how you design the next generation of features. And so you're designing in kind of stronger resilience, stronger operational kind of maturity into the services themselves from the beginning, all of which is going to make both the delivery to your customers better, which is, of course, the whole goal to begin with, but is also going to make the kind of further improvement in sort of operational excellence kind of even easier. And so these things have, there's a really sort of positive reinforcement sort of flywheel that happens as teams start to invest in this theme explicitly. It starts to inform their kind of other work in very useful ways and make that work better as well.
Yeah, I like it a lot. It reminds me how I pitched to my team about how design and growth is not a team job. It's everyone's job. You have to incorporate this into how you design the feature and how you launch the feature and how you test and QA the feature and those kind of things. So operational excellence is the same thing. It has to be distilled among every single team. And then there's a kind of a flywheel that's happening when everyone has this mindset. It takes a lot of time, but it's worth it once everyone is actually up for it. Let's have 2 or 3 questions not related to operational excellence. I've seen a few in the Q&A tab about an advice, Jeremy, on how much time do you commit to trying to stay deeply technical? A broader question is, do you stay deeply technical, and how do you do this?
I would say my number one technique now is reading. So I find I can get a lot more mileage out of reading technical material, even code, than I have time to write code myself. I do try to stay in tune with kind of day-to-day sort of development tools and development practices on the team at SoFi. The time management for that is really hard, I will confess. So I keep trying to find ways to sort of improve that. As everyone here knows, your development environment and your mental picture of sort of what you're doing from a coding perspective decays really fast. And I first sort of noticed this back in kind of startup days as I transitioned from a lot of coding to more thinking about kind of other management tasks or sort of team leadership tasks. I wasn't, kind of writing code more or less every day. It took a lot more effort, kind of per line of code to be able to do that work. But I do try to stay pretty close to the details of the technology. I think the one benefit of sort of experience is, and especially given the kinds of systems that I've worked on, is I've worked with a lot of different kinds of technologies, and so I think that the benefit of that experience is kind of learning the next thing, is a little bit easier maybe than kind of really early in your career when all the systems are kind of relatively new.
Two more questions, not necessarily related to operational excellence. One is about a build versus buy. Any take on build versus buy? So it's a question from Ramesh. What do you think?
Yeah, in general, on most teams and sort of most kind of technology-powered environments, engineering time is one of, if not the scarcest and kind of most valuable sort of resources. And so you really want to be thoughtful about what is it that we want to kind of build and accomplish ourselves, or that only we can do, or that kind of really differentiates, is going to be a real differentiator for us, versus what can we adopt in kind of third-party technology that's basically off the shelf, or that we can kind of lightly sort of customize or extend that will really help us. And you'll find answers on both sides. So I don't have, there's not a sort of one size fits all, but I think you want to be really judicious about what you spend significant time and energy on with your own sort of engineers. And that will lead to a lot of third-party kind of tool use. I mean, if you really take a step back and think about what we depend on, all of us doing our work depend on just a wealth of kind of third-party technology. And that's everything from, the hardware, virtualized or real, that we're running on top of, the OS and all of that. And it wasn't so long ago that teams had to do a lot of that work for themselves. And so I think just kind of extending that, especially in the sort of OE work, you want to take advantage of kind of tools that other teams and companies are investing in to the maximum extent you can.
Sounds good. There's no one size fits all, and I guess the next questions there is not going to be a one size fits all answer either. But at least hearing a perspective about how do you decide between delegation versus doing it yourself? Any high level philosophy or high level rule of thumb?
You want to. It all comes down to kind of prioritization and focus. You want to in any role, especially in any leadership role, tech lead, manager, director, CTO, whomever, you want to be really thoughtful about what are the most important things for your team and organization as a whole to get done. What are the most important things that you feel like you should be attending to? And then the other things that are important, find ways to kind of delegate or empower others to focus on. And so, we can think of lots of sort of examples, but it's again, sort of mileage will vary, and it'll depend a little bit on the sort of team and your own role and the kind of nature of your sort of experience and kind of how you think you can best contribute. But empowering others, when you're in a leadership role, what is unlocked when you're kind of doing it really well is your ability to kind of empower sort of others to accomplish really important things, and sort of the extension of that ability well beyond, what you would be able to do individually, either because of expertise or just because of time and kind of energy and all that. But that's sort of the kind of magic to unlock there.
This one was not easy to answer in 1 minute. The last question I have should be pretty easy to answer in 1 minute. Is you mentioned you're reading a lot. So what's your favorite leadership book?
My favorite leadership book. Let's see. A lot of the sort of leadership lessons I got from the Marine Corps experience, I found translated really well into high growth environment. Oddly enough, I mean, even though the cultures are pretty different, in the military, in the Marine Corps especially, it's a high uncertainty environment. The stakes are often sort of fairly high, and you're very resource constrained. And so a lot of the sort of leadership techniques that the problem solving techniques, the creativity that's required there kind of translate well to a high tech environment. I think the book that I've read most recently that sort of really stands out to me is about the sort of title is escaping me at the moment, but is about basically the language and sort of leadership. I think it might be called like Leadership in Language or Leadership is Language, something like that. It's actually written by a Navy captain. who just talks about the kind of vocabulary mindset on really sort of improving the kind of quality of work and on a ship that he took over. So I would encourage people to look for leadership lessons and leadership writing kind of outside sort of business and technology. I think there's a lot of important and interesting sort of lessons beyond beyond the shores of just the sort of tech universe.
Awesome. We are out of time and we answered 11 questions. We still have roughly 10 of them, but we did 50% of them in the time we have, which is very efficient. It was operationally excellent. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for your time.